I'd like to welcome everybody to the second night of the Word on the Street Festival. And we'd like to start off with a land acknowledgement. The Lethbridge Public Library acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pay respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Tonight's session is Cartoonist Talk Community and Quarantine with Sam Hester and Eric Dyck. Sam Hester writes autobiographical comics that have appeared in a range of different publications, like her local community newsletter, a few international anthologies in the Calgary-based journalism startup, the Sprawl. Sam also works as a graphic recorder, taking live illustrated notes for organizations all over Alberta. She captures their stories by drawing upon deep listening skills and a lot of markers. Sam lives with her 2 children in a really old home in Calgary. Eric Dyck is a cartoonist and art educator living in Lethbridge, Alberta. He has shared his love of cartoons and comic storytelling in art galleries, museums, schools, and libraries throughout Alberta and New Brunswick. Eric has been documenting his experiences and adventures in Southern Alberta through his webcomic, Slaughterhouse Slough. Eric uses his comic strip to share about the people that he meets, the stories that he hears, and as a means of learning more about the history of Southern Alberta. I'd like to welcome tonight Sam Hester and Eric Dyck, and we will turn it over to you.
Hey there. Do we have you, Sam?
I'm here.
Great. Oh, and Jonathan's on, maybe?
I'm here.
Okay. Welcome, and thank you, Jonathan, for that, and welcome, everybody. So if it's just you and I, Sam, if you're okay with that, we'll just talk a little bit about some of our experiences in the last 6 months. How are you doing? Are you okay?
Yeah, thanks. I've had a busy day getting my kids back to school. We signed up for the remote learning option, not the in-person attending school option. So my day has been full of navigating online platforms. So this is a much more friendly online platform today.
Oh, good. That's the hub. That's what you're talking about?
That's right. And yeah.
I suspect there's a lot of parents or folks watching right now who may have had similar experiences. I believe that you've had one comic already that's kind of been looking at some of the challenges you've had with your hub experience.
Well, yeah, last week I just wrote about how we hadn't had an experience yet because the online learners have started a little bit later than the in-person learners. And so it's been a suspenseful wait and kind of like a feeling like time's going by and shouldn't we be doing something? And today it all happened. So there'll be plenty of stuff to to write about in my next comic.
The comics that you've done over the last little bit when we say the comics, we should be clear to everybody. Sam Hester is the resident cartoonist for the Sprawl. Is that fair?
Yeah, I guess there's been a few other contributors of art and cartoons, but I've been more regularly contributing, yeah.
How would you describe the Sprawl for folks who haven't encountered it yet?
Well, the Sprawl is a local, so that's, I guess I'm in Calgary and that's where the Sprawl is right now, but I guess a Calgary-based journalism outlet that's covering issues in Calgary and also around Alberta. And that's been around for, I think, just over 2 years now. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's been a bit longer, but I joined just over 2 years ago. And
I know that certainly with the pandemic and the not just the escalation of the urgency of news in all corners of the province and cities and country right now, but I believe that a lot of the funding for the Sprawl comes from crowd donations and Patreon and things like that. And that certainly escalated for them in the last little bit.
Yeah, it's been really wonderful to see how much Alberta, consumers of news are interested in reading their own local stories from their own local reporters. And yeah, it's been giving me lots of optimism that people are interested in that kind of stuff.
Fantastic. So you had been doing some comics for the Sprawl for some time.
Yeah, I started writing comics like just about whatever was going on in my life, what was happening in my neighborhood, in my community newsletter. And when the Sprawl started, it seemed like another good outlet for local stories. So yeah, I've been writing comics since, yeah, just over 2 years. And this year they've become more online comics that shifted with the times.
So when you're doing comics for the neighborhood, they were getting printed?
Yeah, that's right. I live in a neighborhood that has a community newsletter that comes out once a month, and I was at home with children and not really the chance of displaying art in international art galleries and stuff like that. So I thought I should write some stories for my own community newsletter, and I did that for a few years, just in my neighborhood.
When you started doing comics from a similar viewpoint for the Sprawl, I mean, anytime they're online, they're for the whole world, but your mandated audience was now the whole city. Did that lend to a different approach for you in your pre-pandemic comics?
I mean, I guess it's always a balance of like telling a story that's personal enough that people will find things to relate to in it. So it's nice to put those little, real life details, like the fact that there's a fire hydrant on the corner of your street or something about your own neighborhood, but also to make it enough, like broad enough that people could relate to it even if they've never been to your neighborhood. So I guess it was just a bit of a wider balancing act, but it's pretty much the same thing.
So can you tell me a little bit about your pre-pandemic process when you are needing to deliver a comic to the Sprawl? Where does your comic generation start? Are you working in a sketchbook? Do you write sentences down? How are you making what's the journey to getting that comic online at the Sprawl?
Yeah, thanks a lot. So we kind of experimented with a lot of things before we landed on what we're doing now, which was that I would draw in a sketchbook with markers and pencil crayons on a piece of paper like I always have done. And that was kind of working, but of course there's always something lost in the online experience or the digital experience if you're working in that kind of medium. It's hard to see it on a phone and that kind of thing. And so this year we tried as an experiment to write a comic that I would draw on a tablet in a digital form, like that's where it would start. And then just kind of landed on using that format with some dimensions and some formats which were hinted to me as like something that would work well by you, because you've been a mentor for me in translating the stories that I've always told into a format that's more something I hadn't tried before. So we're still using that same digital format this year, and I've been trying to write. For a while it was once a week, and then over the summer it kind of had a hiatus, and now back to hopefully more regularly again.
So to own up to everybody, so we're acting all formal like we're in this proper panel, but Sam and I have known each other for a number of years now, and we're even starting to work together a little bit. And this, you folks are getting to take part in something that we do almost weekly at this point, where Sam and I are just touching base, making sure things are going okay, talking about problems we're having, whether it's a challenging client or trying to solve a comics thing, we're trying to communicate something. I really value having Sam to bounce ideas off of, or even to check in with after maybe something's gone public and talk about the reception to it. And so you folks are getting to be a part of this tonight. And that's something that kind of makes Word on the Street a special festival.
Yeah. And I'm happy to invite more people into that kind of circle, because I remember when we first met, how I found like there were so many things in common about our process of writing about local stories, working with real facts from history, from our communities, and translating that into a bunch of comic strip panels. And when I first talked with you, I had the chance to have a shop talk experience about like what's your process like, and how do you handle it when it's about a real person that you know, those kinds of questions that led to us having a really rewarding, for me, working and friend relationship.
So there are cartoonists in Alberta, but particularly in Canada, who are working the way that we do. They are talking about real stories in their own communities. In some cases, even pre-pandemic, it was very much about their own household. But it can be really challenging for some of those folks to reach out and make connections, or maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the things that get in the way of you making your comics. I'm still thinking pre-pandemic, just so that we can look at some comparison later. So what are some of the challenges that you have just as a mom, as a daughter, as a public cartoonist that people recognize you? What are some of the barriers to you making your work that you'd have to overcome?
Yeah, I think it is pretty different pre and post pandemic, the different challenges that are there. And yeah, probably earlier, the biggest challenge is just time, because writing comics isn't something that most people do full time in a regular schedule. Like, it's not too common that you have a work day that you can just predict will be always the same way, especially when you're writing a story that you might get a great idea or you might not get a great idea. So, trying to fit those great ideas that you hopefully get in between the family caregiving that's my main, the way I spend most of my time, looking after my 2 kids and my mom. That was always the challenge before, was just fitting things in between the other stuff that came up, but it was a pretty healthy balance, because those things fuel the good ideas too.
And you had some full-time work that involved traveling or taking part in very public events.
Yeah, that's right. I worked for 7 years as a graphic recorder, which is kind of an emerging field around the world and a booming business in Canada, where people appreciate the value of illustrations and visuals along with their meeting minutes to get engagement in the subject that they're talking about at a conference or at some kind of public discussion or whatever kind of, business or organization conversation. And so I would go to all these events and take notes with lots of pictures attached to them so that people could, use those to reflect on the work that they were doing. And that totally stopped with the pandemic.
It's gone.
Yeah, like there's a few events I've worked at virtually from my house by connecting, on a screen. But for most people around the world who do that kind of work, they've had to quickly shift to remote platforms for that kind of stuff. And my shifting is not quick, as you know. Technology hasn't been my strength.
Well, and our relationships to clients can change, and their financial situations can change.
Yeah.
And so that the loss of that has been a pretty big difference in your day to day. And so you kind of shifted your focus of your Sprawl comics when you and your family locked down, which I think was even in February. It was a bit early. Yeah,
it was a little bit early. I just read the news
in hindsight,
all day long.
It was smart.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm more risk averse, so I decided, yeah, you know what? Because first I was really overwhelmed with the pandemic, and I was like, oh my goodness, what is this going to mean? What do we do? What about my work, my family? And then I found out, okay, I can do something by staying home. Great, because I like it when I have something I can do that solves a problem. So that actually felt like an empowering step to choose to just stay home just before the lockdown started. And then that gave me a chance to write about it too, because there I was at home.
A comment I get from a lot of folks is it hard being locked down because you're not out in the community learning things or finding new things or meeting people? Your scope of your comic very much became in your household once you locked down. Was that refreshing for you? Was that a relief to bring the focus right into your home, or was that a big challenge for you?
I think it's both, because I'm an introvert and I like to stay at home, and I am happy to stay at home and just write about whatever I'm doing. And so that was a relief. It was kind of like a permission, like, okay, the story now is my living room. Great, I know that story. But then it's also, after a while, a bit of a concern, because like, surely that cannot be a story over and over again that people are going to want to hear over and over again. And there's not a lot of new material if that's what you keep doing.
Right. And you have 2 people in your comics setting who are, they're captive. They are bound to be in those stories. They were before, but they're especially part of the stories after the lockdown. How do your kids feel about that? Are they anticipating their cartoon appearances? Are they reluctant or snarky about being recorded in a sense?
Yeah, well, you and I have talked before about what happens if you're telling a story about a real person who is being depicted by you. And that's a big, I think I learned a lot about that also as a graphic recorder when I was telling other people's stories, like going to that event where that's that organization, it's that, organization's, use of different terms that they use or different culture. And my perspective is just there in service of their story. So I still bring my perspective, but it's not the way I maybe want to frame it. And that's always the way I try to approach any story. But with my kids, you're right, they're captive. They don't have a choice. And when you have like a new baby, you can just write about that baby and it doesn't even know. But my kids are old enough now that they do know. And so far they're still keen, they're supportive, and they really help me thinking of the ideas. Like they know, oh no, you've got to write a comic. Okay, what do you need? How much coffee do you need? What ideas have you got? And then they really help me talk it through. But they don't usually read the comics that I write. They don't usually look at them. And that's just fine. I think when they're older, they'll get curious and then they'll want to take a closer look.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, I feel fine. I think I don't know. It's a mix. Sometimes they're interested and sometimes I think they would feel self-conscious, even though they've signed up and they've been part of it and they've seen it all. Yeah. It's the same for me, actually. I feel self-conscious to look at what I've written after I've done it. Like I like to write it and then I like to send it away and like never look at it again.
Doing that online with the Sprawl or even with social media, the things that we make can take on new life as they are received, as comments start to come in, as it gets shared around. Are you someone who follows that? Are you responding to comments related to the Sprawl social media?
Well, I'm not a big social media user. I really like Twitter. That's it. I never joined Facebook and I don't do anything else. So I see that, like I see what's on Twitter. And
so that protects you from the awful side of the internet.
Well, that's my hope. That's why I keep staying away.
That also means that you're shut off from any positive feedback or even follow-ups or, hey, I really appreciate the way you handled that story. How are folks reaching out to you? How are you making connections with your community when you post these pandemic comics?
Well, so the Sprawl team who does handle social media has like communicated with me if there's anything really good or bad that they think I should know. So that's helpful. I'm grateful that I'm on a team where it's not just me having to navigate that stuff. But also people email me and it's like a huge source of guilt to me that I'm really bad at answering emails because I really want to do it thoughtfully and in a grateful way. And just since this year, I am really bad at finding time to sit down and thoughtfully write messages. So I got some messages. That's not how the internet
works, Sam.
What's that?
That's really not how the internet works. Thoughtful replies are not.
I refuse to. No. Well, some people wrote to me in March when I started my pandemic comics, and I was really grateful for the messages they sent to say like, yes, this resonates with me. Thank you for doing it. And I wrote back to some of them in August.
Oh wow!
But I did write back to them. So yeah. I feel like I'd like to stay connected by writing the comic. Like this comic is for you readers who are so awesome out there. And even if I didn't email you back, I'm writing this new comic for you. That's my hope.
Consider this my reply.
Yes.
So that's your experience with the comic existing out in the public. How are your kids dealing with the comic being out in the public? Do they want to know what people thought of it? Are they on social media? Are they engaging with the public's consumption of the comics at all?
No, I mean, I might tell them like, hey, I heard this nice message from someone, and they might get a kick out of that kind of thing, but they're not. And I don't know, I think my younger son, Henry, he's almost 7. He doesn't really care what's going on. But my older son, Alec, who's 11, I think he's at the age where I want him to be known for himself and not because his mom did something. And I'm really excited to meet his teachers at the new hub online remote learning. And I felt like, oh, I'm going to be really good friends with some of these teachers. They seem really awesome. But then I also have to remember, okay, I want Alec to meet those teachers and for them to make a relationship with him before they know anything about what I'm doing. And because I think when I was that age, I would not have wanted, well, I know I didn't want that. So yeah, but I still like to do my work, and hopefully Alec will be okay with that.
Do you have to deal with that in public when you're out? Hey, you're the cartoonist. Hey, it's Sam Hester. Is that something that, are you getting recognized when you're out places?
Well, this year I definitely haven't been out anywhere. But
right.
one year I volunteered with my son's class at City Hall School, which is a program where the class spends a week exploring City Hall. And I've worked a lot with the Calgary City Hall with a bunch of different, all sorts of different projects in that whole municipal government group. And a bunch of people there were people who I recognized and knew, and my kids and teacher and their class were surprised that some of them had not ever been to the City Hall. But
wow.
For me, that was a place I'd been
boring
before.
Famous.
No, just in Calgary. But I think you're the same version of that in Lethbridge, because everywhere I've been in Lethbridge, or the people who I've talked to about the work that you do, I think that the fact that you've been so involved in your community in Lethbridge has brought the comics into that community in a way that I don't think would be there if you weren't doing that.
I think, well, both of us work with our own kind of self-portrait in the comic.
Yeah.
And so we don't get to complain too much when people can recognize us.
Yeah.
But for me, it actually has worked the other way, where my comic was my entry point into the community, whether because I'm not very good at social stuff, or because the comic was my expression. The comic is my form of engagement.
Yeah.
And a lot of the really rich relationships that I have in the city often are because they experienced my perspective of the city through the comic, and then we connected, or they reached out, or something like that. And so so my presence in the community, whatever that is, the seeds of that were sown by the comic as opposed to the other way around. Now it's been 6 years or 7 years, whatever. It may be transitioning that way, or people are reaching out to me with stories in ways that they wouldn't have the first couple years. So I guess that's cyclical, and that comes around.
Actually, I was really meaning to ask you, actually not in this talk, but the last time we spoke, I had talked with my kids about how, they learned that you like to keep a little table out on your front lawn for neighbors just to stop and say hi. You like to draw chalk drawings out in the community where people can just walk past and see what you're working on. And yet you're a kind of quiet, sit in your studio kind of artist kind of person like me. And so my kids and I wondered, are you an extrovert or an introvert? And we really didn't know.
What was their guess?
We didn't. All of us didn't come up with an answer. And maybe it doesn't have to be one or the other, of course.
And it's something that I maybe have honed. I know that just to be an artist who's selling things, you have to have some salesmanship going on. Dealing with clients, you need to be assertive and outgoing. But yeah, people who've met me, that's really not who I am and what I'm like. That said, I also have to turn that intensity down when I'm talking to somebody about their own story. If I'm interviewing someone, I really want to be pulling back and letting them tell their story. And I really value oral histories and things that are recorded from the museum. And I can tell right away if an interviewer's capitalizing on the recording, and I think I'm going to hear 75% interviewer and 25% interviewee, the person with the stories. And I am fairly conscious to try and not be that person when I'm talking to someone about their stories.
Yeah, it's another balance.
So whether that means I'm fake and that I change and flip-flop, I don't know.
No, I think I can relate a little too, that you have to turn on a different skill set depending on what you're doing. And especially when you speak about, interviewing people and asking for that information for a story, which I think you do a lot more than I do. Like you you've gone out to research people you don't know or history you don't know. Like you follow up little details and you check and you have to be kind of brave enough to be nosy and to be persistent about that stuff. Yeah, I can just stick to what's in my neighborhood. Like I already know those guys, so it's not too intimidating. Although you still have to see them the next day, so you have to be careful in a different way.
Has that been a concern with the pandemic, being that we see people less? I caught myself with some stuff that I was doing, realizing, oh, I haven't been outside for a bit. I absolutely could run into this person today. Let's think about let's think about where I really want to go with this, and remember that I'm talking about real people, and these are real relationships that I have. And it's easy to forget when you are having trouble maintaining those relationships.
Yeah, definitely true.
So you've been at the doing the COVID Sprawl comics for almost the full 6-7 months.
No, I kept getting sick this summer, so I just didn't write any in around June, July till the end of August.
And you were moving back into your home.
I was moving.
Life stress.
Yeah, lots was going on. But actually, it was so great that like I've talked a lot with the Sprawl team members about how it's weird for me to be on a team, because if you're a freelancer, like you and I both would do a commission for a one-time client, or maybe a client you get to know after lots of different experiences, but each project is just its own project. And when that one's done, you're done. But this team they're always there. There's always more stuff. And so it was kind of scary to me to think, well, if I can't maintain anything in a continuous way, then what does that mean? But they were so understanding, and this has been a weird year anyway. So I don't know if we have an exact schedule of how these comics happen, because part of it is there's no use in writing a story if there's no good thing happening. Sometimes you have to wait for something interesting that people would want to read about.
There was something about the first few months of the shutdown too that were really I don't want to say, oh, we have all this time, we can do more work. It was so stressful, and trying to find a way to cope. I produced far more work in the first part of the year than I have later. I haven't actually posted a new comic for a number of weeks now. It just hasn't been in me. And it was a new comic every few days for a little bit at the beginning, or a new drawing or a cartoon.
Yeah.
And I've been talking to other creatives who have struggled with the same thing. I've talked to kids who've stopped their music practices. There was an intensity. There was I just have to be doing something in the first part of the shutdown, and a lot of folks they're tired, and they've been upset or sad or angry for so long now. It's hard to have an outlet like that.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot when I was thinking about this talk about how my introduction to comics that would tell a story that was a bit beyond just my own, sketchbook about what I was doing was 20 years ago. I was invited to be part of an anthology about what's happened on September 11th, 2001. And a bunch of comics artists, well, there were a few anthologies that came out, but I wrote a piece for one anthology. And it was like this comic that, reached, well, I don't know. There were a bunch of thoughts I had about that and how it relates to things that are happening now. But my thought was really that at that time, I asked myself, like, is it worth making art when there's this much problems in society? Like, is this a thing that's worth doing? Is this going to help anybody, or is this going to help me? And I really made peace with that. I was like, yeah, it's totally helpful. It's a way to connect. It's a way to share, what different people experience who can't get connected otherwise. They can find common things in the story, and it's an outlet, and it's got all these good things about it. But so 20 years later now, I wonder how many new young artists are wondering that now, maybe if they didn't have the chance to do that soul searching before. And I even wonder myself again, like, is that still true? Like, does it still apply now with the issues in society now that are going on these days? So.
That's one reason I asked about your exposure to public feedback about the comics. and hearing about the emails, that's great. Because when we found out that it was fine to go out with the dog again, like to just walk around the neighborhood, that was a way to reconnect, sitting out in the front yard to be more visible and to be more available to neighbors. That was something that my wife and I committed to doing this summer. And people, even if they were stopping their cars and hollering out the window, "Love the last comic," or that sounds goofy, but that was a very real manifestation for me, what you're talking about, where I would be going, I just drew a dumb joke about the premier wearing a dress, and I'm suddenly getting all this feedback that it really cheered some sad people up who were having a really hard time. And I got to have that affirmation right away. I think it's maybe more of a slow burn for you.
Sometimes it's right away too.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And even from sharing that work with peers, like with a friend of mine or somebody who isn't even like a reader I don't know, but just somebody who I do know, like my mom or somebody, it still makes me feel like, okay, there's some positive feedback that this is a useful thing that, can help somehow. Because my skill set isn't, like I didn't study medicine, I didn't, I'm not a teacher, like what else could I be doing to help? So if this can help, then I'm always happy.
Has it been helping you? Or is it purely output, or is how are you doing at the end of producing a comic? Are you feeling better about the issues that you're wrestling with? Or is it laying in the mud and now that I'm done, I'm getting out of the mud?
Usually I'm so happy when I get one done, but I think it's been good. Like, it's that balance of the artists or writers, whatever your art is. If you do that thing for a job, or if you do it as your outlet when you're done your boring job, it can, be rewarding in different ways. And this can feel like a bit of a pressure because this is now my work that I have to hand in. But it's the fact that it's hard and I have to try to get it right. It's not just for, there's no pressure. It's just for my own sketchbook. It's really for, I hope somebody's going to see it. That's a scary pressure, but it's made me have to do some soul searching that I think I wouldn't have done. Like I have to grapple with myself and ask these existential questions like, do I really believe this? Is this really the right way to say this? And it's just these like little neighborhood stories, but each time I still have to ask these deep questions that make me really sleepy and exhausted. But maybe I'm better for that.
I'm hoping that folks go to sprawlcalgary.com to look at some of these comics. And you mentioned, do I really believe that? In your first batch of COVID comics, I remember you saying something to me about feeling pressured to be uplifting or to be the stable, I know I've got it all figured out person that people would look to the comic to kind of feel that warm fuzzy. Is that what you're talking about when you say, do I really believe this, or am I really feeling this?
No, it's actually, I think I do want to make sure I strike the right note. Like I don't want to write 2 stories in a row that are both really sad, or I want to make sure that I am considering, like, somebody's going to be reading this and want to make a good response to that. But it's more like I really have to ask myself, like one of the questions I've asked myself a lot is, can I really complain about anything when I have it so much better than so many others? And is this really something that is going to land in a way that, depending on who's reading this, it's actually going to help them or make them laugh or make them reflect? Like, is it really just going to make them say, oh my, this lady's out to lunch. Like, this is not at all what my real experience is like. So I'm trying to put on the hat of the readers that I don't know, which I haven't done as much before as a writer. I've usually just thought, well, if I like it, it's probably likable, so I'll make it. And I think my writing hopefully is better for that, but it's also slower and harder than it used to be.
For independent or freelancing cartoonists like us, it can be really hard to find positive and constructive editorial feedback. In my case, when doing panel comics for a client or something like that, they're not necessarily comics literate. They don't necessarily, they go, oh, I couldn't draw that, it must be good. And I've had someone actually say that. With the Sprawl, I've personally been deeply impressed and appreciative of some of the editorial feedback that I've gotten. It could be as simple as, oh, that's not clear, or wow, yeah, don't draw that. And that back and forth, I hear about journalists and other writers getting that experience, but as a cartoonist, I haven't had a lot of editorial stewardship. And is that something new with the Sprawl for you?
Yeah. Like I've had that a little. Like I've contributed to a few comics, to a few publications, including an academic comic I published for an academic journal about comics, and I wrote about you and another comics creator in Calgary, Damien Wilcox. But
yes.
And so that was another whole level of editing that was like a 3-year-long, peer-reviewed, all sorts of things. But oh, there it is, Eric. No.
Sorry, folks, I forgot I can do this, so I'll try to share a few more visuals. So, welcome to the hour of looking up Sam and Eric's noses.
Yeah. Anyway, that was like a different category of editing, but yeah, usually as a comics maker, you're doing it like you're writing and you're drawing all from the same place, and it's not like you can get feedback from someone else on what that process should be. At least, I know there are awesome comics courses of study at universities these days that people do learn that stuff, but that's never been my experience. So working with the Sprawl has been this really like supportive and vulnerable experience of like sharing my half-finished work, or like figuring out how to share my work. Like I draw really faint lines with pencil on paper that I would send, and they would be like, we can't even see anything. That wasn't helping anything. So
of course that means I have to share something, right? Let's see, I'm sure I've got some Sam comics in the cooker here. Oh, there we go. Can you talk a little bit about some of the editorial feedback or changes that you've made working with on the Sprawl comics themselves? What kind of editorial experiences have you had?
Well, I mean, there have been a couple of different ways that either we've talked ahead of time about what should the idea be, and then once we agree on maybe the general idea, then I can go away and write something. But it's also been helpful, like the two editor and assistant editor, Jeremy and Jimena, are both writers, so they can read my writing and say, that sentence or that word or that phrase that was repeated twice maybe isn't needed, or those kinds of things. And I think that's what they can write the title or the byline. Like they can write, how do you sum this thing up? How do you wrap it up when it's all done? Which I don't even do. So that's been neat.
It's changed the way that I write and the way that I plan out my workflow a little bit, because I can't necessarily send them a super sketchy, okay, this circle over here is this person and that squiggle over there is that person. I have adjusted my workflow because I need them to see what I'm getting at fast. And I can't necessarily keep it in a super rough state for too long.
And I think this, like the fact that you and I have both adapted our processes to have like a half-finished version that you can share, like something that's a work in progress that's still polished up enough that you can show somebody, that speaks to how comics are more, they're used more, they're accepted more. Because in the old days, you would never have needed to do that, because who were you sending a comic to that would care about editing it? And now, like the fact that the Sprawl and other clients of mine who I've worked with as a one-off thing, writing a comic story to tell like a healthcare story or an organization story, that's something that organizations welcome, and that I think readers of the Sprawl really enjoy, having this visual story, a personal story as part of their regular news. And the fact that that's a thing people want these days is like, that's awesome, because indie comics were not always this accepted.
And not always seen as such a valuable part of contributions to the community. And simply, when I'm hearing from strangers on the street that they really enjoyed one of the, so for Sprawl, for the pandemic, I started doing a series of posters that were taking on the template of the old Do Your Bit posters from World War I. And hearing from people that they were printing these out or that their kids were doing coloring versions of them, it felt like a really silly, goofy thing. And then it is playing a role in how someone else is coping with the situation. Yeah. And that was really an experience that I don't get to have, let alone have it the next morning or even same day in some cases.
Yeah. Yeah, and now that we can't go out and physically give somebody a hug or go and teach them or whatever, like, I wonder, like, I hope other people are getting that same positive feedback as we are too, because, comics are something you can share, but not everyone's work that's so needed is necessarily so shareable. So yeah, I feel grateful that we both get to do that.
Something that's changed with social media, but even just now that I'm working digitally more, is the turnaround time between creating something and then it being consumed in public. There's still jobs that I have where nobody sees it for 6 months, but especially at the beginning of the pandemic when the Sprawl was really looking to make connections to its readers very quickly, and the situation was changing so fast. I was, sending them comics based on something somebody had said in the news that day. That turnaround time, that's probably quite different for you. How much time is there between you having a conversation that ends up in a comic and that comic is now online?
You'll find out tomorrow or Saturday if I finish this one about everything that happened to me today. Because I had a week where there was no online school, and then today there were all these things that happened. So the comic that I sort of started, it could be a whole different comic if I included the stuff that happened today. So yeah, it just depends on it still comes down to the same thing as it always was, which is just how much time is there to sit down and write and draw that stuff. And that just depends on the things that always have to come first for me, which are the family, people who need to eat and sleep and be, looked after. Yeah.
We got a question in the chat. Do you mind if I just read it, Sam?
Yeah, I think questions are good. We're talking the whole time, okay. Just you and me. Let's hear what people think.
Oh, sure. Thanks.
So, Chris has commented that it's for you, Sam, based on your experience with the Sprawl in Calgary, what are some suggestions for journalism students here at Lethbridge College? They're thinking along the lines of entrepreneurship and independent journalism.
Wow, do you mean specifically, is it possible to ask a question back? If it's about comics in particular, contributing to those kinds of, projects as a comics maker?
I know how we can. Chris works with journalism students at the Lethbridge College, yeah. And so they could be videographers or writers or even cartoonists. Yeah.
Chris says that you can answer specifically about comics. That would work.
Thanks. I guess. I don't know. I'm only one contributor to the Sprawl, but I have the impression that lots of things get pitched to that group. Lots of people have ideas of what they think might be a good thing to do, and it could really be a fluke of whether the thing that you're pitching is happening at the right time, or if you happen to have the right medium that suits that particular story, whether it's a video or a comic or a story or an interview or whatever. But I don't know, it's sounds like a cliche, but to work in the medium that most resonates with you will always make the most authentic work, and the work that people will want to consume will always be that, the stuff that comes from you the most naturally, the way that I've always thought comics are the medium that works the best for me. And there's an openness to those different ways of telling stories now that's been really gratifying to see. So I think there's lots of possibilities, and a big interest in local journalism happening in Alberta, I think specifically. So seems like a good time to be working and studying that stuff.
As a content producer, Sam, you were making and presenting stories before it was in a journalism context too. So you we're entering that journalism context with, I'm not even sure how many years under your belt of making comics or telling stories.
Yeah, I started writing comics about 20 years ago, and they've always been kind of published sporadically. Like, I've never been regularly published, or I had one big book or something like that. But over those years, I've published lots of comics, and I guess that gave me the freedom to pick the projects and write about the things that I knew how to do and felt comfortable doing, so that when it had to shift to a different platform, I felt like I had that under my belt already. So I think, yeah, starting with what opportunities just present themselves to you, that's probably a good way to start before you go anywhere else, maybe.
And so the reminder to folks out there that Zoom has their little chat question Q&A thing. We're really sitting here talking like Sam and I do, and we're just checking in with each other. And so if you want to interject with questions or ask something specific, by all means. And Sam, that goes for you too, if you've got some more questions. Yeah,
my kids are not here to interrupt us with questions, so like we need somebody.
It's too bad, because I was expecting them to do their little dance coming into your viewfinder and really give us a sense of being a freelancer during COVID.
You have to imagine it. I'm enjoying my peaceful hour of peace.
I keep waiting for the dog to throw up, because that would just be really on topic.
There always has to be a joke with that kind of thing in your comments.
With looking back at where the Sprawl comics are headed, I mentioned that I'm busy. I'm lucky to be busy. I'm working on drawings, but storytelling has been a lot harder for me in the last month or so. Where are you at? How are you doing with, you've had, I think, Sprawl comic in the last few weeks in a row now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe 3 or 4, I don't know. Yeah, I think I feel a little bit re-energized. Because I did take some time off from working on this kind of work. And it feels like there's a little bit more happening. And especially with school starting, right at this minute, I feel especially energized, because I feel like this is something I want to say something about. I have some questions and criticisms about how things are going, and that fuels my need to tell a story. But we'll see how realistic it is to, or what other stories come up, I guess.
Have you had an experience where you've done a comic about something as specific as the hub, or something as current as the idea of kids trying to do remote schooling, and then gotten feedback? Have you heard from anybody in authority about your schooling experience that maybe wouldn't have happened without posting a comic about it? Or this is your opportunity, if anyone's watching who can help Sam with schooling. Please say something.
I haven't heard from anybody in an authoritative role in education, but I've heard from other parents and teachers who are kind of feeling that they can relate to, like me, just trying to figure this out and navigate it together. But I don't know. I don't want to. I'd rather that those comics about that subject would kind of elevate the subject for now. Some experts who know about this can do something about that. It's not because I want people to pay attention and come and help me and my kids. I want the subject to be made, awareness to be brought to the subject. And I'm never an expert. I'm just somebody who wants to put it out there. And then hopefully just by raising the awareness, some new things will happen that hopefully are good.
And you mentioned before that something you wrestle with is, should I even be speaking up or speaking out? But when the comics do resonate, or when there are folks who can relate to them, they might not have had that outlet. They may not have had been able to make the connections to their experience. They're sharing with you, and you're making some connections through the comic that maybe look at the picture a bit differently.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I'm always hoping that there'll be something in there, like one little sentence or one image or something that'll make somebody go like, oh yeah, that's what I feel too, or like, oh, I hadn't thought of that, or something. And then they can go to their community and do whatever they need to do with that. And it doesn't even matter if I never find out. So yeah, that's all I hope. And I also think it's funny that people always tell me that they cry and they're sad when they read the comics I write, at least this year. So I'm sorry, everybody.
I'm afraid that I am careful when I share your newest comics with Terry. Some of them, yes, they drive home their point very directly.
I hope that emotional. I hope it isn't my legacy that my comics make people cry. That's like a weird thing I didn't expect. And also, is my screen turning black and white?
You may be a little bit fuzzy. Is it getting really dark?
Well, it's darker than it was.
That you need to worry about?
Okay, as long as it's still working at your end. It looks funny to me.
You mentioned my comics making people cry. That was something I had to wrestle with reading Peanuts as a kid. Is that, sometimes they hit the wrong emotional chord that I was looking to a comic for. And it took me a long time to not just embrace a comic for making me cry, but to forgive it.
Like, you'd go into it looking for a laugh and you'd feel like betrayed that it made you sad instead?
Absolutely. I even stopped reading Peanuts for a number of years because of a particularly devastating comic about, I think Charlie Brown was looking through the hole in a fence at a pool party that he hadn't been invited to. And he went home and sat in a bucket. And I was upset. I was mad. That comic made me really upset. And that's not what comics are for. I'm not supposed to feel that way. It took me a long time as a kid to come around to that.
Yeah. Looks like we have a couple more questions here.
Great.
Catherine has a question for you, Eric. When is Slaughterhouse Slough 7 coming?
So Slaughterhouse Slough is my nonfiction comic strip, and 7 means the 7th compilation of the comics. And that's been a really challenging thing right now, is for freelancers like Sam and myself to produce a comic for consumption that's physically in people's hands. And to be clear, I love having a comic or a book tactile in my hands. But it's as a cartoonist, we have to put up the money to have that printed, and then we have to hustle and sell it. I'm not sure, Sam, I don't know that you've done any sales for quite a while with your self-published books.
No, I haven't. Comics were never a way of earning a living for me. Like, that was always, it was like a thing I did on the side because I enjoyed it, and then graphic recording has been my day job. So you're better at the hustle.
That's new for me too. But when we moved to Lethbridge is when that really started. There was just something about Lethbridge being full of nerds who like comics. And so because there were opportunities like farmers markets for me to sell the comics and try and pay off that printing bill as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. I know that some sales and some markets and things have started up again, but personally, I haven't been putting myself in public to sell things and to do transactions and things like that. If I can't readily move the book, then it's scary to put up the money to print the book. Could that change in the next few months? Potentially, but even looking at Christmas and Christmas sales, I'm really struggling with whether I can put up that money. So I would love a book 7. It will happen eventually. We're just going to have to see what the next few months are like as we roll into wintertime.
Okay. We have another question from Henning. They're wondering is there a way to get into comics if you have good story ideas, but you're not the world's greatest artist?
Sam, do you want to take that one?
Yes, but I'm sure
that
we could say the
wasn't
same.
Suggesting anything.
Yeah, no. Actually, you once said to me that my drawings were Quentin Blakey, and I think you meant that they were like scribbly and messy and like just bold and not like afraid to make mistakes. And that's it's just because I have no time to draw good pictures. And if I really wanted to make the comics I really wanted, I would, painstakingly make every perfect little oil painted panel laid out exactly right, and then it would take me 10 years to make every page. So I have to let myself make drawings that are not good drawings if I ever want to have comics that come out, in time for people to read them. So I think to answer that question, like 100%, 1,000 comic writers who are not good artists make great comics. And good art is pretty subjective too. It could be good for somebody, even if it isn't good, for somebody else. I think I don't like to compromise on the story. I like to think the story is good. But the art, to me, it's sort of, just fills in the gaps to make your eye go to the right place and be as forgiving as you can about that. Yeah, Eric, what do you think?
I'm going to push back on your denigration of your artwork. Even the drawings that you've been doing for the Sprawl comics have been rougher and rawer than some of your work in previous years. And that has brought an energy. When I said Quentin Blakey, I do mean the energy. Those lines are honestly angry and alive. And that's been really an exciting part of some of these really stressful pandemic comics, because you are visibly working through this stuff as you hold the pen.
Well, yeah, the art has to suit the time. It has to suit the story. But I just wouldn't want this questioner to think that, you have to get too fussy about what the art is like, because, the art could be like, of course, it's great to study art and get technically good at art, but comics are very, it's wide open to what images serve the story that you're trying to tell.
And if you're going to work with a collaborator, work with an artist, in my experience, it is so helpful when that writer can even communicate to me what they see happening with stick figures. So in the case of Henning's question about someone who likes to write but can't draw, I would say get making comics anyways, because you are going to understand the beats and rhythms of panels. You're going to start to write the images too, where you're going to say, okay, this person's saying this thing, but the audience can see in the background that's not really true, or just stuff like that, that you're going to need to have experience creating some comics that just, even if you aren't happy with where the art is at, the artist you eventually work with is going to appreciate you thinking graphically like that. It's funny that this came up because Teresa Wong, who did, oh dear, what's it called? Scarlet?
Dear Scarlet.
Dear Scarlet. Teresa said last year at Word on the Street that she didn't consider herself a great artist, and that she had drawn it herself just to get it out, and also to be able to show her editors what she was trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And then assumed it would be farmed out to an artist. But Teresa's story cannot be told or shared by anyone but Teresa. It's so personal that I think Teresa's a very expressive and really interesting artist as well. If she didn't see that right away, it was still, the images were coming out of her pen, and nobody else could have told her story her way. Yeah. And I think it's really important that that book has her own drawings in it.
Yeah.
We're quickly running out of time here, so if anybody has any last-minute questions, I have to say we had a comment from Barb. Who said it's been an absolute delight listening to the two of you just chat. And I have to agree, it's been a wonderful session here. So unless anybody else has any questions, I guess that'll be it for tonight. Word on the Street will be back tomorrow for their third session with kids programming in the morning and young adult in the afternoon. But thank you very much, Eric and Sam. It's been a pleasure hosting you tonight.
Thanks for connecting me to the Lethbridge community, you guys. I feel like an honorary member.
You're welcome down here anytime, Sam.
Okay.
And thank you so much for sharing with your comics, but also talking a little bit about your personal experiences today.
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me, Eric.